Hi, I'm Jack Howell. We're going to talk about a drill that I use primarily for tone production and single tonguing, and it is the double tongue drill, oddly enough. This video is intended primarily for my Duquesne students, so those of you who saw double tongue in the title and clicked expecting to hear the next Bob Spring, that's not what this is. Let's start with a couple of acoustical principles regarding the clarinet. First, the reed. When the reed is vibrating and we exert pressure on it with the embouchure, we effectively shorten the length of the reed and the pitch rises. Conversely, when we decrease pressure on the reed, the effective length increases and the pitch drops. With the oral cavity, when we raise the tongue and decrease the size of the oral cavity, the pitch rises. When we drop the tongue and increase the size of the oral cavity, the pitch drops. This is acoustics because the clarinet is a closed pipe. That's simply how it works. And you can test it for yourself. And every once in a while, students come with all range of awarenesses of their oral cavity and how their tongue functions. Even the best of them I have found to be assisted by this drill. And the ones who are most challenged, it can be a real shortcut for fixing what I regard to be a problem in clarinet playing. And I'm aware of this problem because I started off the same way. My clarinet teacher, when I began, was a wonderful man and a wonderful musician. He was an oboist, and he didn't teach airstream focus. So I began, as a lot of students do, with a very low tongue. In fact, I thought the lower my tongue was, the better I would sound, that the darker the sound would be if I could open up and really create this sort of, big cavity. And the problem with that is that it throws all of the strain for controlling the sound and controlling the pitch, and even to some extent controlling the articulation on the embouchure. So in order to have enough energy in the air to start the sound, you have to constrict the reed. In order to play in tune, when you're trying to play really loudly, you have to really bite and keep that reed short. And there's a limit to how far that works. You can make adjustments by playing a more open-facing and a harder reed, so that you can play loudly and still clamp down. But it remains inefficient. It's like trying to drive faster by pushing on the gas and the brake at the same time. So what we want is a tongue that is educated, that produces the correct oral cavity size and shape in anticipation of the note we're about to play. And we want a tongue that controls the airstream focus by being high at the back and making an aperture. So I've struggled with various different ways with myself. It was a laborious process. It wasn't until I started studying with Bill Jackson that I started learning how to gain control of the back of my tongue and to anticipate interval changes with my tongue rather than responding to it, which is what you hear when someone changes pitches and you hear the pitch kind of scoop. So I've been trying to double tongue for decades. I've worked on it consistently, kind of all along. Every once in a while, a piece would appear on the season, Galanta Dances or Bartered Bride or something like that, and I would think, I've just got to make this double tongue thing work, or I'm toast. And I would work on it really hard and not quite get it. Somehow I would get through the concert, but part of what I found happened was that the more I worked on double tongue, the better my single tongue got, which I thought was interesting. And as I explored it, I could feel my tongue becoming more educated. I could feel my airstream becoming more constant. and I could feel my embouchure becoming more quiet. And so I started trying this with students, and I've yet to find a student who hasn't been helped by working on this. And I've had some students who have learned to double tongue. It's fantastic. But everybody, I think, is helped to some degree. So here's what I ask them to do. And realize that rapid double tongue articulation at this point is not the goal. It's, kind of like finding a pearl in an oyster. If you do, that's fantastic. So I'll say, let's take a G, and let's play the best possible, most beautiful open G we can. And this kind of relates to another video. But anyway, let's just make a G, and then what we want to do is somewhere with the back of the tongue, we want to make a very slight syllable. Now, very often with students, we'll hear something like this. Which tells me that they're in the habit of having a very low tongue, and as they bring the tongue up to make the ka syllable, we hear evidence of that. Okay, so what we want to interrupt the G. We don't want to stop the airstream. We merely want to interrupt the tone, and we want the pitch to be exactly the same on both sides of that interruption. If we do that, then we know that we're keeping the back of the tongue high, otherwise the tongue would be moving, the pitch would change, and we know that we're moving the tongue very little, otherwise the pitch would change. And what we find almost as a byproduct is that the embouchure is being very quiet. The student who has been in the habit of chewing their articulations, that link doesn't exist because they've never tried to articulate this way before, so the embouchure just stays put. So just by doing these things, we've established, to my mind, nearly ideal conditions for a single tongue. Focused aperture, steady middle of the tongue, consistent oral cavity, quiet embouchure. Now we introduce the front syllable. And what we find at this point is that the player may not be, in order to preserve this ka syllable, where the front of their tongue touches, maybe not where they're used to. And I think that's okay. The way I believe and the way I teach clarinet, we want to prioritize everything for the most beautiful sound. And that dictates where the tongue touches. I've known players who touched the reed with the front of the tongue, with the very tip, with the middle of the tongue. We've been taught that anchor tonguing is anathema, but I know several stellar players with articulations far better than mine who do that. That's because if we prioritize for the tip of the tongue touching the tip of the reed, that will work only for those players whose tongue size and shape is optimized for that. If you've got like a big old Gene Simmons tongue, you might find that where you contact the reed is not the very tip. But without telling you where exactly, we want to maintain all of those conditions that we had with the G, and we want to introduce a front syllable that is equally subtle, right? We're not trying to tongue fast. We're not trying to tongue staccato. We're simply establishing our ideal conditions. Consistent, maybe even overabundant airstream, consistent oral cavity, quiet embouchure. Okay, the student who does that is probably making a single tongue. Well, let's say not every student, because the student who has been battling the low tongue or the unfocused airstream at this point is probably going to find themselves making a single tongue articulation that they've never made before, because this drill has eliminated a lot of the sequences of the habit of assisting the articulation with the embouchure and moving the tongue all over the place. So even though it's a very subtle single tongue, it's a very clean, very correct single tongue. So once we establish that, I ask the students to start moving it through different registers and experiencing how the higher register is more sensitive to changes in tongue position than the lower register is. Right? The higher you get, the harder it gets. And then another exercise is to go back and forth between registers with, and I always use the ka syllable first because I think it preempts the old habits coming back. If we start with the ga, then we expect a quiet, slight da. And so forth, right? And that's the exercise. And once again, don't let the fact that this exercise is not primarily intended to achieve a fast double tongue to mean that you're not going to achieve a fast double tongue. If you do this exercise with the correct quality and you have the genetic potential, you're going to learn to double tongue, and then you'll have a weapon. Okay? Go get them.